Welcome to the Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Friday, July 7th, 2023. I'm Brad Eli, here with my two hosts, Simon Rafe and Christine Niles. And also gracing us with his presence today, Kyle Kopey. Hey, Kyle.
You're very welcome, Brad.
Social credit system. It's already happening officially in communist China. The Chinese Communist Party can financially penalize random citizens who demonstrate a lack of loyalty to communist principles. But is something similar to that coming to free countries in the West? Well, over in the UK, there's been a string of recent news stories about people being canceled by their bank. Recent reports discuss how a parents' organization called Our Duty, which is critical of transgenderism, was barred from opening an account with Metrobank. There are some related stories, which we'll cover here in a few minutes. Simon, we'll start here with a person in the UK having similar troubles, a chap from your former part of the world who seems to also be struggling.
Nigel Farage has said, I've been unable to verify the full truth of this, but Nigel Farage has claimed that nine banks have refused to work with him. Now, Nigel Farage, of course, is very famous as a politician in the United Kingdom. He was quite involved with the Brexit thing. If you remember back there and a few years ago when the UK voted to leave the European Union, it was a very close vote, but just the Leave party, who said they wanted to get out of the European Union, just eked it out. And Nigel Farage was one of the voices there.
He does say he's not very politically correct.
Well, I don't know. It's interesting. You say he's not very politically correct, but he actually got sent, I think, to the European Parliament a bunch of times, as a representative there. So he is quite politically connected, but quite sort of what we describe as, right-wing, conservative sort of fellow. Anyway, he has recently claimed and said 9 banks have refused to work with him, refused to have the banks with him. His bank, Coates, dropped him. Now, this is an interesting bank. So Coates is not like kind of your regular bank that a regular person would just have their little checking account in and, put their, their money for groceries and what have you in there. It's a bank for very rich people. And apparently what happened is Coates leaked to the BBC, which is the British Broadcasting Corporation, which is the national news media there in the UK. They leaked that the reason Nigel Farage was dropped was because his bank balance had fallen beneath £1 million. Now, £1 million is obviously a lot of money. It is more than $1 million. It's a significant amount of money because this kind of bank is for particularly rich people. And so obviously this may be embarrassing for Nigel Farage, that it's saying, hey, you're not as rich as perhaps people thought you were. That's there. But also, there's been apparently some people have contacted the BBC to say, well, I have an account with this bank and my balance is less than $1 million. But again, it's difficult to ascertain that because it is quite private. But Nigel Farage is saying that he is being forbidden from opening various bank accounts by these banks. And of course, the consideration is this because he is espousing a political position which is unpopular, although I will say he's espousing a political position that won in a national referendum and won without any accusations of cheating. So I'm not sure how Nigel Farage can honestly say that he's representing a non-majority position.
Well, I'm really disturbed by this. You mentioned the Our Duty group. So this is a nonprofit that criticizes transgenderism, criticizes this agenda being pushed on children. And they represent over 2,000 parents. And they've been refused a new account at Metrobank. Metrobank, which is the UK's 7th largest bank with about 2.5 million customers, joined the far-left LGBTQ plus Stonewall Charities Diversity Champion Scheme. So they're part of this Diversity Champion Scheme. And now, this group, this is what they're claiming. They're claiming that because of our position, which clearly conflict with their agenda, they will not allow us to bank with them. And so that's their concern, is this is a politically motivated movement of debanking people who disagree with your particular agenda. If you recall, the Freedom Convoy in Canada, Justin Trudeau's administration threatened these Canadian truckers that if you don't stop your protest right now, we are going to freeze all of your bank accounts. And we also know that now they justified, of course, by claiming that you're halting the economy, you're making things difficult for the rest of us, you need to get back to work. But there were other things that Trudeau did during that Freedom Convoy protests that many people uniformly roundly blasted as tyrannical, the way that he brutally tried to suppress it by sending in these armed people to trample protesters. One elderly lady was left with broken ribs, people being roughed up who were simply just there peacefully trying to protest. Yeah, I think it is a concern, this possible political debanking of critics of the regime.
Kyle, what's your take?
Well, even the threat of that, let's say the Trudeau government never actually froze it and whatever, even the threat of that, and people need to realize that the government has the capability to do this. We're going to talk about central bank digital currency, this move towards digitizing your money. If you look at that, for most people, that's actually happening. Most people don't live totally not cashless, but cash full, you could say. I mean, I conduct most of my business, with my card, whatever, and it's just numbers on a screen somewhere. I carry very little cash, unfortunately, for better or for worse. If you look at this, just in terms of America, and stuff like this is happening in America too. There are conservative groups, pro-life groups, who are being canceled by their banks. They're having to move. Luckily, right now, we have the freedom to move to other banks. But if and when they move to a central bank digital currency, you won't have that option. Your money will be basically owned by the government. There will be no other option. It'll be a monopoly that the government basically owns. This is going to take years, however, and like I said, most people are, they're doing this anyways. If you have a bank account, digitized money, I think it's something like 75-80% of Americans, they're basically totally digital in terms of their money. Very, very, solid cash. But there still is, from what I understand, about 17% of Americans, this is over like 56 million people, who have, or claim to have nothing to do with that system, and they transact and they get paid totally in cash somehow. I don't understand. It seems like a lot of people that are doing that.
I think what you would have to look at there in terms of that number, because that number does seem high, but when you consider within America, there's a large number of what we refer to as small businesses, and there's a definition of it, but obviously we all know what a small business is. It's a business that's fairly small, and a lot of these businesses are places like restaurants, like individual little restaurants, not a chain restaurant, just like some little mom and pop greasy spoon restaurant or little diner or something, or they are just some little store that's selling some kind of thing, like a hardware store, for example. All these hardware stores in these small towns, yep, they've been owned by the same family. Him and his dad and his granddad have owned it for ages. And of course, these stores and restaurants and so forth are paying their employees often in cash because they're receiving a lot of cash. And then those employees are going and they're paying their rent in cash, or perhaps they're paying their mortgages in cash at the local bank. What you have to consider is that there's a large percentage, not a majority, but certainly a large percentage of the United States that is living in small town America, and small town America is radically different in the way that it conducts business than big city America, And so I think that's kind of where those numbers would come from. But again, you get to the situation where certainly I think a large number of people, certainly a plurality, if not a majority, live in big cities. And big cities, it's like, I don't know how you would pay your rent in cash in New York City, for example. I don't know how you would do that. I don't know how I would pay my mortgage in cash. Okay, my mortgage company is headquartered in downtown Detroit, but that's kind of unusual. A lot of people's mortgage companies are headquartered 3 states away in some big downtown city. What am I to do every month? Go down there with a stack of Benjamins and just, there you go, there's the mortgage? I mean, maybe I could do that. It does say on every single note, it does say this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. You must accept cash. If anybody tells you they're not accepting cash, it's like, that would be some kind of violation of a federal law. But that you could, but where would I take it? Do I go to the front desk? It's part of this dirty, great big office building downtown. I don't even know how I would get in to see them and stuff. Maybe I could do that, but it would be incredibly difficult and annoying. No, it just automatically comes out of my bank. And if my bank was frozen, obviously that would be a problem.
I want you to walk through downtown Detroit with a big stack of cash.
With a big stack of cash. Yeah, again, that's another risk.
Open carry in the state.
Open carry in the cash.
So also Hillary in about February was saying we need to ban cash in order to combat climate change. I was like, huh? Why would you need to ban cash in order to combat climate change? And really, it's about tracking your purchases, your carbon footprint, where you're going with your money. Or is it even something bigger? A few months later, we reported on this in May, about 19 state attorneys general were actually accusing, this is in 19 different states, accusing J.P. Morgan of this very thing. Not even talking about the CBDC that's supposed to be rolling out this very month, the Federal Reserve with the Fed Now program. You can Google that, Fed Now from the Federal Reserve, about rolling out the CBDC this very month, starting this month of the precious blood. This is what the letter said, opening lines. It is clear, quote, this is the 19 state attorneys general. It is clear that J.P. Morgan Chase and Company has persistently discriminated against certain customers due to their religious or political affiliation. Now, religious and political affiliation is something you don't want to be discriminated against, because next thing you know, you're living in a banana republic if you're doing that. So it's not a matter of if and when it's happening. It is happening, and we are immersed in that. 19 different states attorney general who know the law, who know what's going on, who aren't being sued by Jamie Dimon, CEO of Chase, for saying that, were actually in the letter saying that you were doing this. And that's like, serious allegations right there, that they wouldn't be putting that out there, without some credible, evidence.
And if you want to look at a society that has very successfully implemented this extremely Orwellian system, just look at communist China. Mm-hmm. I feel terrible for the Chinese suffering there. They've already implemented the digital currency, central bank. They've already done that. And they're very advanced. They now have a Skynet program with millions of CCTV cameras everywhere. It's half the world's total of CCTV cameras.
Wasn't Skynet in Terminator?
Terminator.
Yeah,
wow.
No. They have that, and it's to essentially spy. It's to spy on all of their Chinese citizens. It's unbelievable. You can actually see people driving on the highways. You have these overhangs. Literally 20, 30 cameras, all constantly flashing and clicking. Every single, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. People are being spied on. But it's not just that. You have the facial recognition software, which, as we know, they're beginning to implement here in airports just to make things faster. But over there, you use it for everything. If you want to go into a store, you have to show your face and the computer scans it. If you want to get on a train or a plane or a ship, if you want to travel out of your city, we're everywhere. They have the facial recognition software. They have a QR code that everybody must have on their phone. It's called the Citizen Code that was implemented under COVID, okay? So they use COVID for this huge power grab. And every day, you've got to submit your QR code into these little digital things. And if it doesn't come back green, you are denied permission into a store, hospital, train, plane, public transportation, everywhere. And the government controls it. They have the power to switch it to red if they wish. And they actually did this at a phone company where there was a massive protest against the whole COVID harsh lockdowns in China. China had the worst lockdowns in the world. And these people working there in this factory who had been locked down in the factory, they couldn't go home, they started protesting, and they switched, every single person, their QR code switched from green to red. It wasn't because of their COVID status, it was because the government did it. They have the power to do it. It's very scary over there right now.
Well, of course, what you're looking at there within communist China, of course, is the clue is in the name. Communism.
Yes.
That's what you have there, that you have this communist notion. And of course, the idea of the control of the populace, that's sort of the first step within communism. So Stalin would have done that if he had the technology. He didn't, so he just made a bomb big enough to destroy half the world. That's what Stalin did. But had Stalin had that degree of control, he would have done it. The control that Stalin could exercise, he did. Mao, the infamous Chairman Mao, the founder of modern China and communism in China, he did the same things, but just limited by the technology of his time. So now, of course, what we're seeing is it's a question of, well, here's this technology, which is, as you said, Christine, we've now got the facial recognition when we go to a an airport in order to, your words, make things quicker and easier. Well, okay, this is quicker and easier for the Chinese Communist Party in China, because now it's quicker and easier to do what we want to do, which is to control. The fundamental issue that you've got here is the leadership, the ruling by this communist group, which does not look at people as individuals. It looks at people as resources, as simply cogs in the machine, as just mere statistics and all of that sort of stuff. They do not recognize the dignity of the human person because they are so utterly opposed to that. We are here in this country, in the United States, obviously we don't have a communist regime yet, and I don't know if we would ever really have a communist regime here, but what we do have is we have a regime which is secular in its nature, at which point the notion of the dignity and the uniqueness of the human person, which is a Catholic teaching, is simply not present. It's all about statistics, it's all about numbers, it's all about that. It's not about the dignity and the individual worth of the human person. And of course, yeah, that's the thing. This is not a uniquely Chinese issue. This is a uniquely communist issue.
Absolutely. You mentioned Mao just as a very quick tangent because it just brought this to my mind as a beautiful anecdote. During Mao's purges, of course, he persecuted many Christians. He was very anti-Christian. And so he, millions of Christians either killed, whatever, but many of them were actually forced out of their jobs and forced into menial labor, very humiliating tasks. So, for instance, millions were being told, okay, now you're going to go and clean people's toilets. That's what you're doing. You're not a professor anymore. You're not a banker. You're going to be cleaning people's toilets. Well, what was amazing is God actually used that. You now had millions of Christians going into people's homes, doing these tasks, evangelizing these families, and resulting in millions of conversions. So it's amazing that God can work this horrible, tragic situation for His greater glory.
That was the Cultural Revolution, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course. The Cultural Revolution is, so there are two, and people should know this because I think, there's kind of a lack of historical knowledge about communist China within the United States in general. Of course, we just have this idea that China is communist, and we forget that China became communist in 1949, following the revolution. That China, the Republic of China, not the People's Republic of China, the Republic of China, was of course one of the allies in World War II. That is why China, the People's Republic of China, has a seat on the United Nations Security Council. But of course, the Cultural Revolution, the Communist Revolution happened in '49, and the communists took over. And then there are two very important events that people must understand about communist China, and I would urge people to go and Google them, whatever, go look. There's a bunch of very good videos on YouTube that you can watch to give some historical context to these things. The first one is the Great Leap Forward, which is where Mao tried to turn the country overnight into an industrial country, from an agrarian, a very simplistic country, tried to get it to some economic advancement. Absolute flippin' disaster, total mess up. Tens of thousands, if not millions of people died in this thing, and it was economically absolutely awful. Terrible thing, but again, all kind of covered up by the communists of this tons of propaganda. And then the Cultural Revolution, which is where, as you said, Christine, people who were felt to have bourgeois or capitalist leanings, often people who were very educated, people who were teachers and professors and all this sort of stuff, they were forced into working jobs working with their hands, where they had no training and no knowledge, and so this was an absolute disaster for the industrial and the agricultural areas. And they pulled these people who were, loyal communists out and put them into positions of power. It was this brutal repression and destruction. There were these rampaging gangs of youngsters going around. They called them the Red Guard, who went around and destroyed things. I would bring this up because we're talking about the advancement of socialism and so forth in this country. Well, what happened in 2020 and following? We had these rampaging gangs, not of the Red Guard, but of the Black Bloc going around. We had these Antifa people going around, and what were they doing? They were tearing down statues. Well, what was the Red Guard doing in China? They were going around and tearing down statues, tearing down the old, tearing down all of this previous thought, getting rid of Confucianism, which had been the philosophy of China for a long time, and destroying books and destroying statues, and essentially canceling people in that way. Now, certainly what we saw in 2020 and following, while horrific, was certainly not on the level of the Cultural Revolution with the Red Guard. But it's one of those things, people have got to read this, because it's like, okay, that was not something that Mao just woke up one morning and went, oh, wow, there's all these young people rampaging around and it's a thing and they're canceling the Confucians and they're doing this. Wow, didn't expect that. No. That was Mao's plan. He encouraged the Red Guard, at which point these people were encouraging Antifa. They were bailing them out. They were giving them support. If you want to be somewhat conspiratorial, they were shipping bricks to them, to get all this stuff started. So, yeah, you want to talk about, history repeating itself. There you go.
So we have a lot of cancel culture that really started in 2020, just talking about all the stats reported on coming down and that. This whole debanking thing, it also hit Andrew Torba. He was trying to found Gab, which is another outlet in the social media world. It seems to be controlled so much by the corporate media. But another area we haven't really talked about, just the whole ESG. Kyle, you've been looking into this too, how the corporate world is using a very similar approach that the banking world is using and that China used. This ESG, can you explain that to the people, and also how the corporate world is actually implementing, rolling that out now?
Sure. So what CBDC, central bank digital currency, will do for the individual citizen in terms of allowing the government to turn you on, turn you off, cancel you as an individual. In the banking. In the banking, deplatforming you there. But it could be a social credit score or something like that. That's happening sort of a macro level with the ESG scores, because those don't apply to individuals, they apply to companies and corporations. So there are other companies that... Can you explain
what the ESG is?
So ESG, and there's different variations of it, but it's mainly the ESG, environmental social governance. So these are basically, I would call them woke quotas that you have to hit as a company. You have to hire so many minorities, you have to reduce your carbon footprint by X, Y, and Z. You have to agree with this leftist talking point, whatever it is. That's the government part of the acronym. If your company, fails and succeeds in that, is determined by another company, these sort of auditing organizations, like BlackRock, like Vanguard, like State Street, and there's some other ones too. And they've been entrusted with the power, because these companies are so rich. They're not banks, but they're asset managers, and they can push a lot of capital back into certain companies, and they can recommend certain companies and not recommend certain companies to investors. So this is why companies like Bud Light and Target, at the end of the day, they don't care about the boycotts. Honestly, it hurts them a little bit in the short term, but in the long term, they know that their ESG score is going to bring in investors, and they're going to recoup a lot of that capital that they lost from the boycotts.
That sounds to me, that's very reminiscent of the social credit score in China. And China's been doing that for a number of years now, and it really is so Orwellian. So essentially, social credit score is how do you behave? And it can increase your score according to the communist government, or it can decrease your score. And it determines every aspect of your life. It determines what kind of job you have, whether it's high paying, low paying, whether you get a job at all, which college you get into, whether you are marriage material, because your partners can look at your social credit score and see, oh, is he going to make good money for our family or not? Believe it or not, you have to see it to believe it. There is a government propaganda commercial trying to encourage Chinese citizens to increase their social credit score. And so what they show is they show a man in different situations. He's going to a bank. He shows his social credit score. Then they show the maker going, and he's gone. He's sitting on a date, first date. He shows his social credit score. The woman looks at it. She's like, nope, and she walks off. He's at a store showing his social credit score, and they're like, nope. And then, but then they switch to another man who's so successful, and so he's showing, and then the banker's like, oh yes, and then the woman, oh, I want to marry you. They show him with the kids, but it's all about, and these things are posted publicly too. They actually have on some towns, they will have an entire wall with the social credit scores and the faces and addresses of every single person living in that town, that everyone can go and peruse and figure out who's a good neighbor, who's a bad neighbor. It is horrible. It's horrible.
There was actually a spoof of this, sort of a comedic spoof of this, done by a few years ago on the TV show Black Mirror. There's an episode of it where it wasn't so much based on debanking, but it was more social media. So it was, you were rated by your peers, and if you got some many thumbs down on a video or a post that you made, then that actually would lower your ability to do things within society or leave your house or get food even. I mean, but that's where this is going.
Yeah, and it's interesting though that we're actually we're reacting, with a degree of amusement and shock and horror to this thing happening in China. But certainly this is happening in China, and the government is, if not doing it, the government is deeply embedded with the companies who are doing it. It's being done at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party. But obviously, when you talk about like social media and so forth, okay, if you post something on social media, which the social media, mavens do not desire that is pushed around, they will, at the very least, suppress it so it doesn't get a thing. The oldest newspaper in this country is the New York Post, a fact that we didn't know. I know, you think the New York Post is just some trashy tabloid out of the Big Apple, but no.
Well, I like the Post, but I didn't think they were the oldest.
It is apparently the oldest. It is the oldest newspaper in the country, and it is somewhat of a trashy tabloid these days. Guilty pleasure for me, but they broke the Hunter Biden laptop story. Okay, now I'm mentioning the Hunter Biden laptop story, so now my social credit score is terrible. I, for one, welcome our new Democratic overlords. I'm learning Chinese. No, their Twitter account, bam, suspended and gone. And they refused to delete the offending posts because they said, well, no, this is a perfectly legitimate place. If you shared that article, it didn't get anywhere. You may have even been cancelled from Twitter and banned from Twitter if you did that. When it was posted on other social media platforms, it was removed and so forth. There are a whole bunch of words that if I say them right now, we have to edit them out of the version of the video that goes on YouTube. There's a whole bunch of words that we have to say, including and, which we have to edit out on the version that goes out on the YouTube. And those are just literally just words that if you mention them, the AI things find them and go. So we already have a kind of this. Now there's a debate, is this a difference in degree or is this a difference in kind? But you know what? That becomes this. The difference is you don't have to be on YouTube. You know what? You don't have to be on YouTube. You don't have to be on social media. But you've got to go, and exist within Chinese society for a Chinese person. The problem is then you can say, well, yeah, hey, go to somewhere other than YouTube. Really, where are you going to go? Go somewhere other than Facebook. Where are you going to go other than Facebook to get that thing? I personally went to MeWe because I was sick and tired of Facebook, but nobody else is on MeWe. Mm-hmm. So I just don't really do social media anymore. And I feel much better, actually, as a result of it, which is fine.
Much better, too.
Thank you. Right? But that's kind of the point. It's like, well, okay, and especially if you're a business, you want to interact in this way. Well, okay, you're a newspaper, and suddenly they shut down your Twitter account.
I have a question. We have some relatively smart people here, Kyle accepted.
Yep.
But the fact is, how did we get here? And I think the audience would like to know that. I mean, we have a serious problem here of cancel culture. It really ramped up after COVID. But it was always kind of there. There was a marching through the industry, through the institutions. We can talk about how the homosexualist march through the institutions and these other woke movements. How did we get here as America? How did we lose common sense? How did we get taken over, so to speak, by the people that have all the chips at the top? What happened? Anybody have a...
I think there are lots and lots of reasons. It's been going back for many years, but just returning this whole deplatforming thing, elections have consequences. And I think one of the most shocking things that came out of the Twitter files was the collusion of the Biden administration with social media, Twitter and Facebook, to encourage this deplatforming and canceling of critical views on the COVID lockdowns, the vaccines, LGBT stuff, all of that. And right now, the Biden administration is facing multiple lawsuits, including from several attorneys general, saying that you colluded, you essentially ordered Twitter and Facebook to cancel these people, and you can't do that as the government. This is beyond now just a private company acting. They are now an arm of the federal government. This is a direct violation of free speech. You can't do that. And Biden just suffered a devastating blow with the federal court that just handed down a decision a few days ago, basically agreeing and basically saying you are not allowed, federal government, to request that Twitter and Facebook ban these. You are not allowed to even request it, because that's what they were doing.
And that, of course, it was essentially the foundation of our lawsuit against the city of Baltimore, that we were going to a venue and the venue said, well, you can't come. And it's like, had that been a purely private venue saying we can't come, that would have been a much heavier lift in terms of, perhaps you would have learned stuff. But no, it wasn't the venue said you can't come. It was the city of Baltimore told the venue to tell us you can't come. So at that point, so at that point, the venue is acting as an arm of the government, at which point that falls foul of the First Amendment.
Right.
I know another. Go ahead, Kyle. You had something.
Well, I mean, to answer Brad's question, how did we get here? It's I think it involves a lot of people who were just trying to go along to get along, and then they're going to still go along to get along. I'll give you one example, and I encourage people to check out our recent episode of Mic'd Up, where Dave Gordon interviewed James Maughan, friend of the show, has been on this show a few times actually, and he describes it like this. These are the people who once they find out that companies like Vanguard, companies like BlackRock, are infusing cash to prop up, these corporations that have gone woke. Once people find that out and they realize how BlackRock is being financed, because they're not a bank, so it's like, how did they get their money? Well, they're playing the stock market. So if you as an investor are realizing that, well, I want my 7% returns, I just want to invest the way I used to invest, I don't want to look at the morality of my investments. But if you find out that your money is going to fund this type of stuff and you don't pull out, that's on you. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to be just saying, morality be damned, I'm worrying about my nest egg, and I'm not going to worry about how my money is being invested.
Yeah, and speaking about this kind of social credit score, this system, it's been going on in Hollywood for a very long time. The LGBT lobby is extremely powerful, and so they will actually give movies and movie companies and studios ratings based on their so-called equality score. They'll do the same thing with businesses. So, for instance, if a movie is more diverse, meaning it includes at least a gay couple and a lesbian and maybe a black or whatever, then they'll get a very high score from the Human Rights Campaign. But if they don't include that at all, if it's maybe an all-white cast and they're only heterosexual couples, then they'll give them a really low score. And the problem is, even though they comprise a very tiny minority in the United States, they are incredibly powerful. And so movie studios, they obey. They obey. So if you're wondering why it is that homosexuals and they seem overrepresented in the media, they're in almost everything, but at least one gay character somewhere in some show, it's because of that.
Except when they take the movie to China.
Exactly.
I see, and that's
totally hypocritical.
So this is kind of the interesting thing. So you have, and there's a lot to talk about this in Hollywood. Actually, it's very interesting. So there's a great website called Rotten Tomatoes, which goes and reviews reviews movies, and it has two scores that it gives. It gives a score from the critics, from the professional movie critics, and it gives a score from the people, just the regular Joes who've gone to watch the movie. And often those scores are completely, they're all over the shop. And what happens, of course, is you've got some movie that's very woke or whatever that gets your high score from your Human Rights Campaign or whatever they call themselves. And that gets this great score from the critics. And it's like 80, 90% from the critics. And it's a wonderful movie. And then it gets like 10, 20, 30% from the people who actually go buy movie tickets at $15 a pop. And so, of course, you can see, and then conversely, of course, you've got a movie that gets this great rating from the people who watch it because it's a good movie. It's just a good movie, but it's not diverse or whatever. So it gets this great movie from great review from the viewers, but it gets this lousy number from the critics. So obviously, that's interesting. But you have also this situation where you get characters in a movie who are homosexual or in otherwise, they're woke characters, and they get cut out and they get removed, or those elements of them get cut out and get removed when they get sent to China, because China is now this absolutely gigantic market for movies, huge market for movies, loads of people out there, lots and lots of wealth in China, new wealth in China. It's become a very rich country these days. Everybody is wanting to watch movies, and so they are, but they don't want to be promoting all this woke garbage, so these characters actually get cut. When you next watch a movie that contains one of these woke characters, just consider, how would I cut this character out or cut his woke elements out? You will find it surprisingly easy to do. It's like, I just need to snip a couple of scenes, and it works because it's designed. Hollywood is designing it so that they can just make a little bit of surgery and go in there. On this subject, Maverick, which is one of the best movies of the last 10 years, Tom Cruise, Maverick, Top Gun Maverick, absolutely superb movie. If you haven't seen it, please go see it. It's very good. He was very involved in the creation of this movie. I was labor of love for him. And he, the character Maverick, of course, Pete Mitchell, is wearing a fighter pilot's jacket that apparently was his father's. On the back, there is a patch from the Taiwan campaign. It's from the Taiwan campaign on the back. And that was in the movie initially.
Wow.
It was in the movie. Then the trailer was released much earlier than before the movie, and backlash from China. China didn't like it. Oh, we won't have this movie if it's there. They digitally removed it.
Oh my God.
Tom Cruise, who is Tom Cruise and is like the closest thing you can get to Hollywood royalty, was like, I think not. It is back in the movie. It is there in the patch. Tom Cruise did that. Tom Cruise, awful person in so many respects, certainly, there. Pray for his conversion to the Catholic faith.
Tremendous actor, though.
But absolutely superb actor, makes, and he would not stand for this.
Good.
But also, the other thing is Maverick, tremendous movie. There is no woke garbage in it.
Yep.
The nearest you get to the woke garbage is the fact that there's like a female fighter pilot, and I think they're very,
why the
very
liberals
rare.
hated it.
Yeah, but it's a superb movie. It's very enjoyable.
I mean, as an aside on the whole Rotten Tomatoes thing, I have really come to completely distrust the critics' reviews. I only go on the average viewers' reviews because I've been burned too many times in the past where I look at 90% Rotten Tomatoes from the critics. Okay, must be good. I watch it, I'm like, this is total garbage. But then anytime you get that high score from the average viewers out there, I'm like, this is a fantastic film. Nefarious is one of them. Nefarious got 96% Rotten Tomatoes by the average Joe, 13% by the critics. They hated it. But it's been called by an exorcist the best film on diabolical possession ever produced. And I would have to agree, it's a tremendous film. So yeah, don't trust the critics.
Yeah. Or look at the critics and say, is it under 25%? It's probably a good movie. I mean, that's a way to do it, isn't it?
Can't we go back to the good old days of Siskel and Ebert? What happened to that?
Yeah, exactly.
But I do
They
just
were
want
pretty
to,
good.
Yeah, I just want to say something about the Chinese censorship situation. They seem to speak out of both sides of their mouth when they're doing their censorship, because they're more than happy to infiltrate Western culture with the woke stuff, with the transgender stuff, with the homosexual stuff. Because, I mean, if you look at where the money's coming from, a lot of, Chinese investments go to actually fund those movies with that stuff in it, but then they cut it out when they show it to their own people, because they know, and this is a communist tactic, it's worked in the Catholic Church, it's worked in the government, if you infiltrate sexual deviance into an organization, it will corrupt and collapse that organization. Infiltrate the American culture with that, infiltrate the American government with that. We look at some of the positions of power in our government, transgender people and whatnot, and it will lead to the collapse of our society.
Yeah, that was actually proven in, I think it was Dusseldorf, Germany, when the Berlin Wall came down. There was actually found the communist bloc files that were opened then. Plans on subverting the West, and part of that was to introduce pornography and get guys being effeminate and all these type of things, really corrupting the spiritual nature, which really shows this spiritual undertone, a really dark undertone, like almost channeling the diabolic through the Communist Party, the way they actually will infiltrate and seep it in. It's completely not out of both sides of their mouth. It's completely one-sided because they know this is poison. We're not going to drink the poison. We're going to inject the poison. So it's completely coherent that they would want to export that and not import that, because they know why they're exporting that, and then therefore why they wouldn't import it. Another way that the corporate world is actually being influenced heavily is that the stocks are being bought up. 10% of the woke block and the financial group are saying, hey, let's get this particular target, this particular company, and we're going to buy up a 10% block of their stock and start leveraging that. Saying, if you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't have this campaign, then we're going to blow up your stock.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Anheuser-Busch. Their response wasn't strong enough to the pushback, so they were upset about that anyway, and they were going to blow up because of that. But there is a behind-the-scenes financial movement where you're controlling stock, and the people on the stock market in the corporate world there know that leverage has power there. So you also look at that, who's controlling the stock behind the scene, and therefore if a woke block can get control of the stock, they can also pull levers to say, well, let's get this done at the next.
But here's the thing, and you asked, how did we get here? And I would say because people are lazy. This is ultimately what it is. Okay, so let's take a look at your 10% of stock. Okay, 10% of stock, that's a huge amount of money. You know what? All of those lefty woke people, they don't have that kind of money. What they have is they have control of that kind of money that is invested with companies like BlackRock and Vanguard. And what is it? Just as you said, it's these people who go, oh, here's my little nest egg, and I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to be lazy, and I'm not going to bother talking about the shareholder meetings.
You speak for me.
You speak. You manage it. You just return this. So I'm lazy, and I just handed my political power, because that's what this is. You handed power over to these people who are going to execute it in the way they want to do it. Okay? You've essentially just lent these people money in return for a good return on your investment. That's the whole thing. You want to talk about social media canceling? Okay, fine. So it was said, that had people been aware of the Hunter Biden story, Joe Biden would not be president right now. That was multiple polls suggested that had they been aware of that, they would. Why were they not aware of it? It was in the nation's oldest newspaper. It was in the nation's oldest newspaper. Why were they not aware of it? Oh, because everybody gets their news from Twitter and or Facebook. That's it.
And Twitter was in collusion.
Twitter was in collusion with it. Facebook was suppressing it, the whole shooting match. So I knew about it. Because guess what? I go and I read the New York Post. You read half a dozen newspapers in the day, and oh wow, hey, suddenly you're plugged into all this stuff that people don't want you to know. But everyone is lazy. It's like, oh, I just want to open Facebook. I'm going to open Twitter, and I get what I am fed. I don't go and research it. I don't go and look at it myself. We suffer from this same thing. If we happen to say one of the words that we're not allowed to say, such as, for example, and we get banned on Twitter for 2 weeks, banned on YouTube for 2 weeks, suddenly nobody knows what we're doing. Well, where are you? We're on our website. We have our website. Come to our website. Sign up for the notifications that you get. Come to our website. Come and find it. It's like, oh, well, I just want it spoon-fed to me. That's not advanced humanity. That's not being grown up. You're lazy. You have got to go out and find this information and not rely on like one person who, Mark Zuckerberg or whomever, or that, homeless looking Jack Dorsey fellow who used to run Twitter. He looks like a total hobo. It's ridiculous. He turned up at the Senate and I was like,
drop these hard lines right in the middle of download.
It's a thing. Whatever it is. But yeah, seriously, people are lazy.
We do encourage people to come to our website. And also, if you can support us, our work premium is only $10 a month. That's really nothing at all. Mm-hmm. It does help us to continue producing our work. So, yeah, if people can help us out that way.
So where, and also in the whole medical industry, the TDA, the Texas Advanced Directives Act, where they're talking about, we're going to make your decisions for you at the end of your life. You can get canceled at the end of your life, right? You can't make your own decisions there. So you said one time, Simon, the difference between communism and socialism. Communism wants to be your God. Socialism wants to be your parent. And really, I think we're at that parental stage where socialism is making a lot of choices that we used to just think we could make on our own and ought to be able to make on our own. Get back to what the idea of just what civilization, society, and government's all for, really giving you the opportunity to grow in virtue, give you a playing field where you're not taking all of that freedom from you. Why? Because you have to make choices to grow in virtue. You have to live your life in freedom to do the right thing. And if you don't have that freedom, you're handcuffed. You can't actually grow in virtue. You just have a whole rubber society, a plastic society that can't grow. So that's where the danger of socialism. And the problem today is even deeper because 25% or more of the young people out there of society wants to have a socialism government. The World Economic Forum says you'll own nothing and be happy. They're like, I'm on board with that. No bills. I don't have to worry about paying for anything. Just, my meals show up on time and all this. That's a scary thing. And that's what the polls are showing. The young people want a parental government. And that's a scary thing.
I got to come in and on some sort of defense on this issue. So the whole you will own nothing and be happy, okay. Find somebody out there who owns a Mercedes. There's a fair few of them. There are two kinds of Mercedes out there on the roads. There are those that were built in the last 2 years and those that were built in the 1980s. Because those that were built in the 1980s were built to last. Mercedes from the 80s were built like tanks. They will run until the apocalypse. They will run. And now, modern Mercedes just don't. They are like every other car. There's built-in obsolescence. How many times do you go out and buy some sort of, small kitchen appliance to replace the one that just broke? You do it every couple of years, okay? My wife, she likes to go to estate sales and garage sales and so forth, and she likes to buy the older appliances back from in the day, okay? And these things, fine, they run like tanks. They run like German cars back when that meant a thing. This whole you will own nothing. Do you truly own your products when you have to replace them every 2 years because they've got built-in obsolescence? Your computer, your phone, etc., etc., etc. When we're buying all this garbage made in China that's made incredibly cheaply, and you've got to replace it every 2 years, do you in fact own anything? I would posit that you don't. You're essentially just renting it for 2 years. And to these young kids who are saying, oh, I'm totally down with that. Yeah, because you know what? The baby boomers and Gen X have sat there and voted for themselves vast gifts from the public treasury, and there's nothing left. These kids will never own a home because the housing prices are out of their range. They will not have a good, reliable, solid job like many of the people of the boomers and the Gen X did, because there's just not. They're just perpetually in this hustle culture of veering between one job and the next, and it's never reliable. This is why socialism is attractive to them, because they've never had security and stability. Now, they've never had security and stability because we've abandoned, good spiritual principles, because we've abandoned decent practices and stuff. But you know what? We were the ones who abandoned it. We looked for a short-sighted solution, and they're going to pay the price.
As far as that phrase, you'll own nothing and be happy. So yours is a wholesome Catholic interpretation of it. Obviously, we agree, that sort of thing. But the reason that people have a problem with that is because it was a phrase invented by the World Economic Forum with a very specific agenda, which is against private property ownership and in favor of essentially, let's take stuff from you, the mega wealthy billionaires of the world who can, World Economic Forum, essentially just telling the little people, we're going to take everything, and you will own nothing and be happy. That's the problem.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Mine's not a wholesome thing. Mine is just saying if I have to buy a new air fryer every 2 years from Jeff Bezos, I don't own an air fryer. I rent it from Jeff Bezos at the cost of $75 every 2 years. That's a reality. If you've got to get a new car every so often, you've got to get a new phone every year, every 2 years, you don't own it.
It's
leased,
buying.
and you don't own it. In practice, that's the whole thing. And this whole, this is mine, I own it. Yeah, for 2 years until it breaks.
I wish the World Economic Forum would come out, and that'd be so hilarious if they came out and said, we will own everything and give you a little bit to be happy.
Right, exactly.
That would be very honest of them.
Yeah.
So what is the solution? We know how we lost it is people are lazy, people aren't living their spiritual values, people kick the can down the road, people live selfishly, let go of family and lack of fathers and everything, lack of prayer and all this, lack of leadership in the church and in the state. How does that all get turned back around, and where do we go from all here? I mean, we got a lot of problems on the table right here and looking pretty bleak for people. You can say pray, hope, and don't worry. But it's almost, there is a movement these days to kind of get less into the world, not necessarily the Benedict option, but more of a self-sufficiency idea where you don't need so much cash. We've gotten into this idea that I need supply chains to keep me alive. And what we need to do is kind of start in a larger area. Hillary Clinton was upset we have cash and we're getting out of the system that way, Well, what if we don't have to have so much supply chains in between everything? That would be a solution right there. And really, it's in the spiritual world too. Do you have to have an honest, wonderful, spiritual bishop to get to heaven? Well, it would help, but you got to do more work on your own. Do you need all these supply chains, to keep you going? Well, it's nice, but it's not totally essential, and they didn't have those, many years ago. Even in this country in the 1800s, you have a bishop on every corner, a church on every corner. Did you have to do a little bit more on your own back then? So in all areas of your life, as you're saying, the problem's laziness here, in all areas of your life, starting to be a little more self-sufficient. Maybe not rely on that one sermon on Sunday to get your whole catechesis. Maybe not just drop your kids off to catechism class and say that's good enough, but actually educate your kids in the faith. Take an interest in what's going on in your family. Shorten those supply chains. Get a tomato growing out back,
No, it's true.
Sure. Tomato.
We do, and it does require some more effort on our part.
On all
for instance,
fronts.
like I said, during the COVID lockdowns and things like that, grocery stores ran out of bread, so I just went home and I learned how to bake my own bread. It's way better than the store-bought bread, and it's a fraction of the cost. Become self-sufficient. If you're not cooking, learn how to cook. It's less expensive. It's more delicious anyway. Yeah, I mean, just learn how to do things on your own. Yes, it takes some effort on your part, but at the end of the day, you're going to be way better off.
Yeah.
There's lots of, this isn't just a cooking channel or anything like that, but the idea that I hear, it would be nice. Simon, put your garments on.
Put a little chef's hat on. Yes.
The thing along this line is too, we're talking about all these economics and how we're being hurt, and inflation and all this type of stuff. When you go to buy your lunch at some, fast food vendor, it might be $12 or something, and earlier in the day you bought a bag of chips or something like this. If you bought a roast, even if it's a higher price, but you can get $2 a pound on sale for, a pork roast or something. Throw it on the grill, throw it in the crock pot, and you have sandwiches all week long for a fraction of the cost.
It tastes better too.
It tastes better. It's healthier. There's no MSG in there and all this other stuff. And so doing some things like that, packing your own lunches and stuff like this, it sounds trite, it sounds crazy, but when you're there throwing down that $12-15 every day for lunch that you could have gotten for $1.50 maybe, and then you're blaming the high prices. Well, high prices are one thing, but just throwing your money away on we're so used to that disposable fast food. Nobody sits down to meal together anymore, having the conversation. We need to return to some of those things. That is the solution on all fronts. Learning your faith on your own. We did shows several years ago about that the people that knew their faith were the ones that explored it on their own. There's about 4% of Catholics that actually knew their faith, and they did it mostly through the internet, through all the studies and all that, because it's hard to get all the good books and everything. So learning your faith, learning how to live again, learning how to be self-sufficient again, learning how to be family again, all of that is shortening all those supply chains for you. You don't need a supply chain of a pope and a bishop and a priest and all this. Yes, you need to go to mass. Yes, you need to be within the church and that type of thing. But if it doesn't give a very good homily on Sunday, don't blame your lack of your faith on that, or even on your family. Teach your family, teach yourself, educate, learn your faith, live your faith, love your faith, and just learn how to live.
We only have a couple minutes left, so I thought it'd be nice to segue to the saint of the day.
Oh.
Blessed Emmanuel Ruiz and companions. They were tortured and martyred in the year 1860 in Damascus because they refused to convert to Islam. And so they were tortured by a bunch of Muslims, and they died in the faith. And they were beatified by Pope Pius XI in 1926. Wow. So.
I guess that trumps us if we were in Twitter jail or YouTube jail for a little while.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's actually kind of the point, isn't it? I mean, this you got this chap.
Martyrdom right
there. Yeah, this chap, he's there, and they get, like straight up tortured and murdered, and then we're sitting here going, oh, we're persecuted because, we get back. Question I got to ask, Blessed Emmanuel Ruiz and companions, who was he out of this group? Was he their leader? Was he actually like the leader?
He was the superior of the Franciscan convent.
So this is the thing that I always wonder. You always wonder, and it's like Blessed Emmanuel Jones or whatever, and companions, and it's always that. I always wonder, was he actually their leader, or was he just the name that they managed to get hold of? Because often these date way back to like the Rome. It's like the Diocletian persecution. It's Blessed Juliana and companions, and it's like, okay, was Juliana just the new convert? She just joined that day, and she was like about to be baptized, and then the Romans charged in, and the Praetorian Guard hauled them off, and it was like someone shouted from the crowd, "What's your name?" And she was, "I'm Juliana," and that was it, Juliana and companions. And it was that.
Looks like he was the leader.
He was the leader. Good. I'm glad that he actually gets the props for that, because I always fear that when the communists kick down the doors and drag us off, it's going to be, like blessed intern and companions. That's what we're all going to be. We're just going to be reduced down to
real quick, your 2 bits, I mean, it's probably worth 2 cents. Your last 2 cents worth, yeah.
Sure. So you talked about solutions, right? What can we do? I think on a more practical level, on a state level, we've seen this a little bit. I think Ron DeSantis in Florida has just passed something to do with trying not to allow CBDC to infiltrate his state. Many people question whether or not you can actually do that, because I think, a huge chunk of Florida's government funding comes from the federal government, something like 30% or something like that. So exactly how that would work, I don't know. But we have to do that type of stuff at the local level, at the state level, because if we allow CBDC to come in, and it will, if we don't do anything about it, it's coming, probably in the next few years, who knows how long. If we don't do anything about it, it will be communism, because this will be you turning over your money to the federal government, and that's what they want. turn over your private property, right? So we do have to push back against this.
Okay. Well, there you go. Well, thanks for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus exules filii Eve, a te suspiramus gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordias oculos, ad nos converte, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium sende. O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time from all of us here at Church Militant. God bless you.